Good evening. Did you miss us? Welcome to the 12-Man podcast, live on Facebook. We're on YouTube, TalkSport Network, Amazon, Deezer, all the other stuff. Quite impromptu, this one, but we had to come out. We got a bit bored sat on the sun lounges, so we thought we'd let you see our faces for one day at least in the summer. Got me, Steve Jackson. I'm your host for the night. Mr. John Donovan's with us. Evening, JD.
No, then how are you doing? I was just
I'm
having
good.
a lovely day there, and
I know
then
I
all of a
was.
sudden, bang! Yeah,
Until about 2 o'clock this
bang! Yeah,
afternoon.
it dropped, and yeah, it's all kicked off, hasn't it?
It's all kicked off. You're telling me it's all kicked off. But quick injury update. How's the knee?
It's a lot better. I've been told that I no longer need to wear the brace all the time, which is good. Ongoing physio to sort of strengthen the muscles around the knee to support it. So yeah, it's okay. I mean, I'm hopefully back at the beginning of August to take my place in the North Stand. Looking forward to it.
I will look forward to having you back. We had back for one game. It was a 0-0, so it wasn't the greatest of introductions back, but it was good having you back. But yes, looking forward to having that. And of course, when big news hits and we need to know the lowdown of what's going on, there's only one man we come to. So we've got Mr. Craig Johns on with us. Evening, Craig. How are we doing?
Evening, fellas. I'm well, thanks. Hope you all are too.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Yeah, good.
I imagine you've probably had a busier day than we have with what's been going on, but we will delve into that. I say, if, people watching, listening, get all your comments in and stuff like that. There's only one thing I can start with. I'll start with the statement itself. Obviously, if you've been under a rock or you've been away from the world, I'll read it. It was courtesy of Middlesbrough Football Club that the news has come from. They have today party company with head coach Michael Carrick. Michael's assistants Jonathan Woodgate and Graham Carrick have also departed the club. The club did put on record their thanks for the hard work and commitment they've put into the role and wish them all luck in the very best for the future, but no further comment would be made. So quite an interesting statement. So talk us through, Craig. Did you get any inkling this was coming at all before that statement came out from the club?
But other than hearing the rumours that I'm sure everybody heard in the last kind of 24 hours, honestly, no. It was well known, 3-4 weeks ago now when the season ended that the club were going to be starting a review, and it was made clear in the briefing to us that review wasn't going to be about finding a scapegoat. It was going to be open and honest conversations. They were going to thoroughly look at every department within the football club, and very much the impression, as I've always said, that I got with regard to that review was that the preference was going to be that Michael Carrick stayed on as head coach for next season. There were going to be certain things that, if you like, were forced upon him, or the review was ultimately going to decide changes that everyone felt need to be made at the club moving forward to ensure that the failures of last season were never repeated. I think that was strongly made clear that nobody accepted that a 10th place finish last season was acceptable. But the inkling was that Michael Carrick actually would be given the chance to continue next season, providing that the changes that they felt were needed, he was happy to adhere to those changes. And as things stand, I've got to be honest, I still don't really know why yet the decision has been made. Why the club have come to this decision. The only thing I've really got out of anybody at the club so far is just that there was a feeling that last season wasn't good enough and a new direction was needed. Now, it's kind of going a bit into speculation at this point here, but is it simply that changes that were kind of suggested to Carrick he wasn't open to? Did from the review they get the impression that he wasn't open to change, or he didn't feel there were any problems and wanted to just continue as was? That they're the things that I'm kind of going to in my head now as a reason to why today would have happened, as say continue to try and get the actual answers. But from what we were told previously to what's now happened today, they're the kind of things that I'm thinking must have happened between now and then.
Yeah.
So Craig,
go on, mate.
sorry, Craig, I was just about to ask, has there been any official sort of press conference announced, or was it just that statement and that there's nobody from the club going to sit in front in front of all you journalists to answer any questions that you've just raised? Is there anything in the offing?
So not at the moment. No, I think the club obviously mentioned in the statement, didn't they, that there'd be no further comment at this stage. I would imagine that kind of thing will come once a new head coach is appointed. You tend to have a press conference, obviously, with a new head coach once that happens. In terms of finding out the kind of answers to the questions that I've just been pausing there, I'm hoping that will come in some kind of off-record briefing within the next few days. There's plenty of people who would have been involved within that decision who'll hopefully kind of give some insight into what's happened in the last few days and why we've ultimately ended up at this point. It's an interesting one. I think ultimately, if we're being honest now, as much as we don't like to see anybody lose the job, we're not celebrating that or anything like that. But ultimately now it's about Middlesbrough Football Club and what's next. So I think the key thing now is who comes next, really, and that's obviously a massive decision. But very interesting that they have in the end gone down the road of sacking Michael Carrick. So to see everything that was suggested to me was that the preference really was for him to stay. I think it's well known Steve Gibson liked him a lot, and that's why, in terms of it's been radio silence. Ultimately, I wrote a piece today on Teesside Live in terms of kind of giving some insight into what the last kind of 3 or 4 weeks since that review started has been like, and ultimately, while it was explained to us what the review was going to be like, since it started, it's then been complete radio silence. There's been no updates, no briefings or anything from the club. I would imagine that those at the very top, the likes of Steve Gibson, will be very, very disappointed that something did ultimately leak out yesterday. It started on one of the forums and it kind of took on a bit of life from there and ended up being correct in the end. And I think the reason why ultimately myself and other journalists wouldn't have found that information out is because Steve Gibson had so much respect and so much, kind of like for Michael Carrick. He really, really did like him as a person, as a human being, and really wanted it to work for him as a head coach because of that. So ultimately, with this kind of decision, there was never an expectation that we would have something like that briefed to us or anything like that, because I think there was just too much respect for Michael Carrick, and the club would have been wanting to do that in the right way. And I would imagine that, as well as being a very difficult decision for Steve Gibson to come to, I would imagine he's quite angry that it did come out in the way that it did.
That radio silence, as you call it, that led to speculation in itself. I mean, I don't know whether you got any messages. I mean, I was getting messages, and I saw people on social media saying, is this review even taking place, or is it just a way of letting the embers burn out after the season and the disappointment after the Coventry game? People were speculating that this is just it was a bit of a smoke screen and nothing's going to change.
Absolutely. I think that's the problem with a bit of radio silence and create the vacuum that it ultimately created in that period, isn't it? Is that within the vacuum leaves space for speculation and gossip and conspiracy theories, if you like. I mean, now it's been proven that there definitely was a review, as we always said there would be, and obviously the most drastic of outcomes has come from that review, and Michael Carrick has been sacked. But I can certainly understand as the weeks went on, many other clubs who Middlesbrough are going to want to compete with next season, we're starting to hire managers. I think Watford have already got 2 signings in the tour, and meanwhile Middlesbrough are kind of stuck in a bit of limbo. So again, by no means celebrating the fact that Michael Carrick has been sacked, but I think it's definitely welcome now that there's that kind of full stop on that. Last season's now, if you like, completely finished. The review's complete. And we now know, we now all have clarity that, you know, at some point in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a new head coach who's going to be, you know, bringing in fresh ideas, and you would imagine with that fresh optimism as well, which I think is a lift that everybody probably needed. I think, as you rightly said, there was a lot of people growing frustrated with the wait and with the silence, and this hopefully just gives everything a bit of a feeling of freshness.
What was your reaction to it all, John Dan? I know you've took my role there for about 5 minutes, but that's absolutely fine. What was your reaction when it finally came through? Because I know you were always like 50-50 about it. You were always, you know, you didn't fully want him gone, or you didn't, you know, but you knew something had to kind of change.
Yeah. Obviously, the way the season went, everybody, fans, everybody within the club was disappointed. So there was always that understanding that something had to give. I didn't wholly blame Michael Carrick. I thought that he could have performed better with a bit more experience around him, and somebody who would not be the opposite to him, but would offer something different, and wasn't always in agreement. But that's gone now. You know, the Carrick era is over, and like Craig said, it's a full stop, and we start afresh. So the news. I don't suppose the club would have wanted it to be as sort of hastily released as it was. But like you say, over the last 24 hours, speculation was mounting, rumours were rife, and then obviously late morning announcements were made. So I'm not shocked. I'm a little bit disappointed because I think he's a decent guy. You know, I just didn't think everything was set up right in the management team, and also I don't think some of the players were necessarily fully supportive of him. But you know, we had a vote of confidence in after the Watford game, you know, and from those 14 games after that, we picked up only 20 points. Now, that's not good enough. So he was given basically a warning, and you know, I've given you the vote of confidence. Go on and make the most of the 14 games and see what we can do. And it failed. We, like I say, we picked up 20 points from possible 42. Just not good enough. The fact that we were still in with a shout of the playoffs into the last game was more down to the poor form of everybody else around us. But like you said, he got the warning, and things didn't improve. So it wasn't a massive shock. But like I say, I'm a touch disappointed.
Yeah, I am. I say we knew it was coming. I've been asked numerous times about what I thought, but I'm going. I didn't see a way to improve it. Unfortunately, you know, we've met him a couple of times. He's a nice guy. He's a really nice guy. You know, down to earth, quite straight to the point. You know, if you ask him how he thought his football career was, he'd just tell you it was all right, and that'll be it. But you know, that's the kind of guy he was. He wasn't an open book like most people are expecting and wanting. But he was I honestly feel in the future he'll be a very good coach. He'll be a very, very good coach. Because he's got all the tools there. He's got something about him. It's just unfortunate that he didn't have a plan B at times when we desperately needed it. You know, in big games and big moments, he didn't have that solution that, you know, other people, even his coaching staff, didn't have it. And I think that's what's cost him, unfortunately. I think
he could go on. I agree. He could go on to be a good coach, but he needs a better backroom team than the one he had at Middlesbrough.
Absolutely.
I like I say, I just think that he could have done far better if he'd have had somebody in his ear all the time saying, "Do this, try this." I don't think this is working, but for some reason, whether it be his stubbornness or whether or not the people behind him were just not offering him alternatives, it didn't work. And he was the longest serving manager in the Championship, but that's no longer. We can't be surprised at what Gibbo's done, considering the poor season that we've had and the optimism that we all had at the beginning of the season, and also the squad that he had at his disposal. So, yeah, it's no major shock, really.
No, it's not. I think that's why no one's really sat here going, "Oh my God, I can't believe that's come out. I can't believe that's happened," kind of thing. We all thought something had to give. But Craig, I'll come to you because obviously it wasn't just Michael Carrick that got released. It was Jonathan Woodgate and Graham Carrick got given the boot. So when I started reading, I thought, they've relieved them all of the duties, but they kept Grant Leadbitter. Do you think that was a case of he goes back to what his original role was? Because obviously he had a bit of to do with the youth setup, and he was in the academy kind of thing. Do you think that's why Grant didn't get the boot?
Yeah, I would think so. I think most kind of incoming managers will probably like some kind of continuation there. As somebody who can maybe knows the club and knows the players, and certainly in the early stages can give them a bit of a hand around the club. So I would imagine there's a bit of that in Grant Leadbitter staying. He was, as you mentioned, always already part of the club's coaching team when Michael Carrick arrived. So as you say, I mean, there were multiple roles that Grant could probably take up, even if the new head coach didn't want him as part of his immediate first team coaching staff. He was only, kind of starting to take these badges when he first came in to the Borough first team picture when Chris Wilder was sacked, and he was kind of part of that quartet who took over at that point. So yeah, he's still a young coach. He's still learning, and I imagine because of that, and obviously his affiliation with the football club, that's the reason why he ultimately hasn't left. He wasn't part of Carrick's team, if you like. He was a Borough coach. Very similar story with Alan Vettis, the goalkeeper coach, who, as things stand, is also remaining at the club. Now it might transpire that whoever gets the job, the new head coach, he might have a goalkeeper coach who he works with and would like to bring in, and in that situation, then maybe Vettis will leave the club. But as things stand, Fettis was brought in under Chris Wilder. And I remember Chris Wilder saying at the time that, this wasn't necessarily a Chris Wilder appointment. This was a Middlesbrough appointment. And he didn't say that I didn't want Alan Fettis. The point he was making was the club need continuation. And there's very few coaches in the modern game who kind of, have such a big coaching team who they take around with them. Chris Wilder always had Alan Neil, didn't he? And there was the guy, I can't remember his name, eludes us now, but the sports scientist who he brought to Middlesbrough with him as well.
Oh, yeah.
They were the kind of two who he had, and I think they've both gone to Sheffield United with him as well. He didn't have a goalkeeper coach, and very few do now. So clubs tend to just have a goalkeeper coach who is the club's goalkeeper coach. So yeah, there's no surprise really that of the coaches that have left and the coaches that have stayed, Grant remains at the club, and for the time being, Alan Fettis does as well, because as I say, they're Borough coaches, I guess, rather than Michael Carrick's coaches.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be pedantic about it, Borough did have a goalkeeping coach. Leo's still about. I know he's obviously doing other bits and pieces, but he's still there. But as you can imagine, the amount of people that are watching us, there's loads of comments saying, happy, sad, he's gone. I say, all say his tactics were found out. There's no plan B. But I'll allude back to what you said, John Don. It wasn't completely Carrick's fault. There's been a couple of comments come in saying, you got to look at the players, people higher up in the club. Do you agree with that? And for me, the players have got to take a massive amount of responsibility as well. They're the ones that go out there and do the job. They're the ones that have to perform on the pitch. I know you can tell them a million times to do something, but it's up to them to actually do it. There's a lot of blame going about at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think it's about. I'm not sort of blaming any particular players. Similarly, I wasn't blaming everything that was wrong on Michael Carrick and his coaching team, but I just thought, once the players are on the pitch, it's up to them to manage the situations. Now, I know in-game management can be done from the sidelines, but it can also be done on the pitch. You're not telling me that the players on the pitch don't see the game changing somehow. They don't see when things go against us. For example, Norwich City, we miss a penalty, and that was at the crucial time. Could have went 4-1 up. Similarly at Sheffield Wednesday, missed another penalty. Could have went to 2-0, and the game's a lot safer. You're not telling me that those players don't have the intelligence to say, right, let's just kill this game, just kill this game for 5-10 minutes, get back under control. Yes, some of that can be done with personnel changes on the pitch, but I also think some of the players didn't have the, there was enough experience there, but they didn't have the strength of character to be able to just close the game down and stop teams coming back at us, because, like I said, 24, 25 points, whatever it was that we lost from winning positions is a phenomenal amount. And in-game management happens on the pitch and on the sideline. So, like I say, I don't think everything was down to Carrick and his team. I think it was some fault laid with the players and their attitude on the pitch. And that's one thing I'd love the new manager, whoever it is, comes in, is to get a real fighting spirit. I mean, we heard Jacko from George Friend, who said about Tony Mowbray always used to say, you need artists and you need soldiers. We didn't see enough soldiers. We didn't see enough soldiers to keep us ahead in games. We didn't see enough soldiers to turn games around if we were behind. I want the manager who comes in to get that character from players. I want to see more of that. The biggest kick in the balls this season was when Sunderland turned the game around against Sheffield United and went up. That sort of just put the lid on our season. But they showed spirit, they showed determination, they showed fight and strength. And I think that's what I want a new manager to install into our players.
Yeah,
because I think it was I think it was a huge part of our. It was a huge flaw in our team. We didn't have that character.
Completely agree with you. I bet you missed me saying that, haven't you? But before I move on to Craig, because I want to talk a little bit higher up about decisions that were made. I bet you're happy, John, that Grant's still at the club.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm just doing it from a former player point of view. He was always one of my star men whenever he played, purely and simply because he was a good footballer, but he was determined. He was a fighter. He was certainly a soldier.
Yeah, he was. I completely agree. There it is again. And we mentioned the last 2 games of the season as well. He was the one that was up screaming at the players, saying, come on, let's get something done. Let's move on. Let's move up the pitches. Try and push on. But unfortunately, for me, it came from the wrong man. That's what coming from Carrick. But right, I'll come back to you, John, in a minute. Craig, I want to start with you on this one. Obviously, we spoke there about Carrick and the team potentially getting the blame for what happened this season. The players have got to take some responsibility. A lot of people in the comments on Facebook as well are mentioning about the hierarchy as well, the recruitment strategy, who brought the players in, who's in charge of all that. Can you see why fans are looking at higher up the club now? Like, it's not fully on the manager to bring players in now. As the modern days, directors of football and things like that stand, and say, this is the players that we want to bring in. We just want to make sure you're happy to do it. Can you see why fans are now starting to look at the likes of, the people above as well?
In some respect, yes, I can. I think, as you say it, Michael Carrick not completely the only reason that it failed last season, and ultimately players were, I don't want to say recruited for him isn't the right word, but they do have a recruitment team, but they're always recruiting what he wants, if that makes sense. It's always the type of player that Michael Carrick wants. He'll tell them the type of player he wants, and the recruitment team go out and find that and present it with him. And, players ultimately weren't signed behind Michael Carrick's back. He signed off, and he, had detailed discussions with the recruitment team about the caliber of player and the type of player that he wanted. I can understand to an extent why the model might frustrate. I think selling key players is always going to be a tough sell. I think one thing that Borough have got to do, because, while I appreciate the frustration of it, I think it's the reality of where Middlesbrough are now. I think Kieran Scott, when he was brought in as head of football a couple of years ago, it was to create some kind of thread, some kind of continuity at the club. Because ultimately what had happened is, for too many years, the club had bounced from manager X to manager Y to manager X to manager Y. And every time they made a management change, it was a completely different style of football every time. And what happens then? New manager comes in, doesn't like last manager's players, so he gets all these new players. Meanwhile, they're left with this imbalanced squad of half a group of players who don't suit the new manager, and another half who are the new managers. Then he gets sacked because of that, because he can't make something of that squad. So then this squad of imbalanced players gets further imbalanced when the next manager wants a completely new style. So ultimately, the club had to create this thread. The club wanted this long-term thing in, and they wanted a philosophy. They wanted a brand that was, this is the way Middlesbrough play. And that's why Kieran Scott was brought to the club ultimately, to kind of create that. And, recruitment was obviously a big part of that, but there was far more to Kieran Scott's role than just recruitment. With that in mind, I don't think the successor to Michael Carrick anymore will be a vast change. I don't think we should expect any kind of, long ball type manager or a different style of play. I think we're still going to see a similar kind of possession-based manager coming in. In terms of recruitment, I think, I can understand why it might frustrate people the way that they do it, but you have to think about the harsh realities of what the Championship is now. Middlesbrough are trying down from the Premier League with many assets from that, but straight away from parachute payments, they've got a £50 million advantage, so they can sign better players, they can have bigger squads, all that kind of thing. So how, while keeping within the PSR limits, which they have to do Borough compete with that? And the answer is, you sign younger players, you sign players who you can develop, and then ultimately sell on at a profit. And, again, like I say, I completely appreciate it's hard to sell to a fan when, Manuel Latilaf's leaving in the middle of the season and things like that. It's a tough sell. But ultimately, you either do that, or the caliber of player that you sign in dips because you can't afford to sign better. The calibre of player that Middlesbrough are still signing to remain competitive in this division is because they're selling Morgan Rogers for the amount they're selling Morgan Rogers for. They're making huge profit on Jed Spence and Marcus Tavernier. They're making huge profit on Emmanuel Latilaf. That's the only reason why they're then able to reinvest the money into the squad and have a competitive squad ultimately. And it's tough. It's a tough landscape that the parachute payments create an imbalance that is hard to breach. And, the good thing is that right now there hasn't been many seasons, if any, where all three teams who win promotion are parachute payment clubs. Again, this season, Sunderland were the one to do it. They got promoted without parachute payments. So the door is still open if you get it right. It's not easy to do that, though. There's no given right that one team to do it is going to be Middlesbrough, because there's many big clubs now in the Championship who are in similar positions and have similar ambitions to Borough with similar resources. West Brom, Watford, Norwich, Stoke, Millwall have built their club over years and are now right in the mix. Bristol City got themselves in the mix. Coventry have recruited really well and sold well in recent years to put themselves in the mix. There's many, many big clubs with the kind of resources that Middlesbrough have who are also within that mix and trying to do it. And it's why you have to get everything right. I think when you're looking at recruitment, I would say the one thing that they probably haven't yet done, which they need to do, is create a bit more of a balanced squad, so that I think what they do is very well is sign individuals who develop well and go on to become much better players than what they were when they first signed for the club, and therefore you've got that potential sell-on value. What I don't think we've quite got the balance right with yet is still the ambition is always at Middlesbrough to challenge for promotion. To do that, you do need a good squad. You need throughout the squad, you need certain things. And going back to what they said about Tony Mowbray and the soldiers, I think that's a factor that we've quickly learned in recent years, and I think they're learning a lot, is that it's all good signing these technically brilliant players, but you need the soldiers as well. I don't think it was any surprise in January that they tried to sign players like Glenn Kamara, for example, and that was all part of the club learning from mistakes and realizing that actually they do need a bit more kind of strength and character within the spine of the team as well. And if there was a criticism, that would be it, is that as of right now, they haven't quite got that balance right in terms of creating a winning squad. They're very good at finding individuals who ultimately, improve at the club and make the club a lot of profit. But we still ultimately want to see a team that on the pitch is good enough to win enough games and be a lot more consistent than they have been. But I would still go back, as much as I don't want to pin it all on Michael Carrick. I do think certainly at the start of the season, the squad was a hell of a lot better than what their results showed. Even I know we've pinned a lot on Latilaf leaving in January, Ben Doak getting injured when he did. It was a huge blow, both of those things coming as soon as they did. But let's not pretend like Middlesbrough were showing for the top six before that happened, because they weren't. And results before that were inconsistent and not good enough. And if you ask me at the start of the season, I still strongly believe that Middlesbrough squad was better than Sunderland's on paper. But the game isn't played on paper, and ultimately that comes down to Michael Carrick and the fact that as head coach, he didn't get the best out of the players that were at his disposal.
I do hope that the club look at selling players in January. I mean, you've got Sunderland there there was an approach for Joe Bellingham in January. Sunderland sort of knocked that back. They were in the top four at the time. And they took a gamble by turning down the offer they received, and it's paid off. But now that the season's over, Bellingham's moving on. So really, they took a gamble in keeping him, and it's paid off. Now, we could have possibly done the same in January with Latilaf. And kept him, and his goals might have might have helped us achieve a top 6 spot, and potentially could have took us to where Sunderland have got. Don't know. It's all hypothetical, but we've sold in January for 2 years running our potentially best player, whereas Sunderland didn't. They've kept Job until the season ends, and then they've sold him. So it's a gamble, it's a risk, but it pays off. I'm just hoping within our review, it can possibly be looked at that we give the manager the best possibility to get up, and I don't think the best possibility is selling your top striker in January.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's when you mentioned in the comments as well. I mean, you mentioned Job there, the lad who scored the winner, Tommy Watson. They kept hold of him for the rest of the season with the premise that we're going to sell him to Brighton anyway. The deal was already agreed, everything was put there. They just told him to hang on till the summer, and you're going to get your move. And he delivered the ultimate prize as his parting gift, and still got his move. So, yeah, I can see why fans are saying, we should have hung on. We should have dug our claws in and dug our heels in and said, look, he's ours, end of. So I do think part of that review, if there is more review to happen, I don't know. It's got to be about the timing of the sales. We have to be realistic and say we are one of those clubs that will be, nurturing talent to sell on for a bigger profit. But we need to find the balance of when we sell them. We can't sell them at critical points in the season where we really need them, because it's not just, a player we're losing, it's a financial benefit as well. I mean, look at what we could have had, kind of thing, if we'd made the right choices and potentially moved forward and got into the position where Sunderland got, that's where we could have been. But unfortunately, decisions beyond, whatever anything else has happened.
Keeping those two players has earned Sunderland £220 million. Where are Middlesbrough going to get that level of investment from? Exactly. It was a gamble, and to the players' credit at Sunderland, Joe Bellingham and Watson, I don't know his first name, Watson, they both sort of knuckled down and give it their all for the club. Exactly. So selling your best player in January, and in the case of Latif, replacing him with a player not as influential was a big mistake. Looking back on it now in hindsight,
it was a huge mistake. It was an absolutely huge mistake. We should have tried to go like for like. For me, that's the style of football we were playing. And I feel like that would have worked for us. But I mean, people are saying, about, we couldn't turn down 22 million. You're absolutely right. We probably couldn't, in January. But I'm pretty sure we got an offer of 20 million quid in August for Latif. If you really felt that was the money, then why didn't we just let go then and try and boost our squad then? I just really feel that it's all about timing. You pick the right times to let your best assets go. No other club let the best assets go in January. No one. We did. And I think that is what, unfortunately, did cost us. And I think that's why when people do start questioning anybody else but Michael Carrick, I can see why. I can see why they're saying it. So, but
it's probably is worth just saying as well, in the interest of balance. I mean, ultimately we weren't privy to them conversations. We can't know whether it did or didn't happen. But the one thing that I've been told since January with Latif is that, ultimately the club didn't want to sell him in January. It wasn't a case of, too good an offer to turn down, etc. What I'm told is that they pretty much begged him to stay in January and try and fire the club to promotion. They promised him that they would sell him in the summer if promotion didn't happen, and if promotion did happen, they promised they'd give him a new contract. But by all accounts, that led to alternative offers. We want this, we want that, blah blah blah. And by the sounds of it, relationships just completely broke down as a result of that. And ultimately, it got to a point where they felt they couldn't hang on to him. It wouldn't be good to keep him around the club anymore because of how much the relations soured. Now, I mean, it's ultimately it's impossible to know whether that is what genuinely happened. That's just the club's side of that. I think what we do know is that it was patently obvious that his agent in particular was getting his name out there as much as possible and was desperate for him to make a move. So I think that is fair to probably believe from Middlesbrough's side of things that they were doing as much as they possibly could to get a move and being as awkward as possible. The part where Middlesbrough felt that ultimately relations was so bad that they had to sell. That's the part where you can never truly know, because as you said, I mean, they turned down the bid from Ipswich in the summer that came on the final day of the window, which is ultimately why they turned that down, because they wouldn't have had time to replace. And ultimately what happened, he had his little sulk, didn't travel to Cardiff until much later, but he then knuckled down and he eventually got himself going again and banged in a few goals and everything was looking fine again. So I mean, you can never know. Maybe he would have become disruptive in the dressing room, maybe he would have become an issue, but maybe he also would have knuckled down and he would have he would have helped fire Borough into the playoffs. It's one of them where you can never really know. But I guess from Middlesbrough's point of view, when there's 22.5 million on the line, can you take that risk? Because it's easy with hindsight to say we shouldn't have sold him. It was detrimental to our playoff chances. But had they not have sold him and he did become a problem in the dressing room and he caused, division and fraction and whatnot, then, we'd potentially be sitting here now and saying, what on earth have Middlesbrough done there? Why did they turn down 22.5 million when with what happened in hindsight? So it's one of them. It's always easy, isn't it, with hindsight to say, why have we done that? But I definitely take the point that I think if you're looking at the opportune time to sell a player, I think the summer's got to be it, because we all know the summer market's easier to buy in as well. And I guess the advantage is that although Iheanacho turned out to be an absolute disaster, it was a pretty low cost loan. Because of how bad he'd done at Sevilla, they were paying less than half of his wages, and didn't obviously then pay a big transfer fee either. So coming into the summer transfer window where more players become available, and obviously they've had 6 more months to kind of look for the ideal replacement. You'd like to hope that everything's in place for this summer to go and get the right man ultimately.
Yeah, no, there's lots that can be discussed on that. I think, end of the day, we didn't get the replacement right. I think that's why the discussions are a bit more, louder than they usually are. But last thing I want to talk about with you two, obviously we've mentioned, who's going to what's happened, etc. Who's next? That's the next question. I mean, Craig, I'll start with you because obviously there's a lot of names being chucked into the betting market. We've got the likes of, I think Rob Edwards was the early bookmakers' favourite, and now it's Steve Cooper. But by the sounds of what you were saying about playing style, I don't know if Steve Cooper will be the biggest fit into what we've got here at the club. Danny Rowe's been mentioned. I think someone's even mentioned Tony Mowbray. What other names have you kind of seen in the last few hours?
So not a lot at the minute, other than the ones that you have just mentioned. I think they're the obvious kind of early front runners and early names who are going to be mentioned. I think Steve Cooper does have fans within the club, and I think although he's not completely like for Carrick, I think he would be able to come in and get a tune out of the players there. I think there's a lot to like about Cooper's style, a lot to like about his CV. He knows Morgan Whittaker well from England youth duties and Swansea, so that would be a tick in his box. If a £6 million acquisition, you're going to want to try and get the best out of him next season when you consider what he could be capable of, but hasn't yet shown in a Borough shirt. Yes, I think there's certainly a lot I like about Steve Cooper, but whether or not it's understood that he is still being paid or would be paid by Leicester City, having been sacked last season. So if he were to take a job, he'd potentially be forfeiting a considerable amount of money. And he apparently has already turned down championship roles in the last year. Probably a bit with that in mind, but also I think there was a kind of ambition to stay in the Premier League on his part. Now, obviously, now it's a summer. It's the ideal time where managers like Steve Cooper who like projects, that's when they want to start jobs, when they've got a full summer to mould a squad. Doesn't look like there's going to be many, if any, Premier League clubs becoming available for him this summer. So does he have a strong desire to get back into management this summer? And if so, maybe Middlesbrough could tempt him. As I say, he definitely has got a lot of fans in the club. In terms of the people who might make the decisions, they definitely like him. You mentioned Rob Edwards as well. He was interviewed when Michael Carrick got the job. He worked with Kieran and also Chris Jones, the head of recruitment. The three of them were all at Wolves together at the same time. So they know Rob Edwards well. Obviously, I think by and large, Steve Gibson gets the deciding decision. But obviously he will be taking on the advice of the likes of Kieran and Chris and other people like that within the club. So I would imagine Rob Edwards will definitely be within the candidacy. And yeah, it's interesting. I can't imagine Tony Mowbray is yet in the thinking. He's obviously a free agent after leaving West Brom, but even taking apart the allowing the heart to roll ahead, I think there's a lot of merit in Tony Mowbray actually, because he probably didn't get a fair crack of the whip when he was Middlesbrough manager first time around. The position the club were in at that stage, meant that he probably wasn't able to, have the caliber of player that he would have liked to manage. But if you look at, for example, what he did at Sunderland, where he started what they've gone on to achieve now, really, with the putting trust in youth, signing really young players and developing them and creating a team out of them that ultimately won. I mean, when you look at the average age of Sunderland's squad this season and the fact that, one of their biggest assets this season, which we often criticised Middlesbrough for, was their character. And, even in the playoff final there against Sheffield United, when the going got tough and they were struggling, they didn't give up, they didn't crumble, they kept going and they found a way to win. They did that so often last season, Sunderland, despite being such a young squad. And it's, as we say, something Middlesbrough just didn't ever manage to do. Well, Tony Mowbray is great at that. He's great at developing individual players, particularly young ones. And he would work within the model. He'd have the style of football that Middlesbrough would want. So yeah, I can't see him being a particular kind of front runner at the moment, but I do think he'd be really well suited to what Middlesbrough need at this moment in time.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you mentioned there about I can't believe how much we talked about Sunderland, by the way. But one thing they had was leaders. I know when Luke O'Nien took off with his dislocated shoulder, whatever it happened to him, Dan Neil stepped up. Then he had players around him that stepped up. Everybody had a role, and I felt that's something we didn't have with our squad. We didn't have leaders on the pitch where if one was a bit struggling with or needs to be taken off or needs to be moved out aside, we didn't have anybody to fill that mantra and that role, unfortunately. But hopefully that's something that the new manager can sort. Before I ask you, John Don, about who you hope or want to potentially come in, last question before I ask you, obviously, your choice, Craig. This decision, because you mentioned there, Gibbo will just get the final choice, which you're absolutely right, he does. Is this one of his biggest decisions he's had in recent years? I feel like the club's at a crossroads right now. We need to get this decision right. This needs to be the right appointment, especially where the fans are at the moment. A lot of, disillusion around what's going on. How we fell apart at the end of the season. Is this one of Gibbo's biggest decisions he's had to make in recent years?
In some ways, yeah, I'd say it's probably the case every time he comes to changing a manager. We were probably sat here and saying it was when he appointed Michael Carrick as well, weren't we? I think that's just the nature of when you make a new manager appointment, it has to be the right one. I think, I think there's definitely lessons to be learned in other clubs. I think you look at Hull City and deciding to sack Liam Rosenior 12 months ago, and then going with the manager they went with, and that proved an absolute disaster. And let's not forget, when they did sack Liam Rosenior, that was after finishing above Middlesbrough in the table. Yeah. So I think there's lessons to be learned in absolutely needing to get this right, because there's no guarantee whatsoever that a new manager is going to take it upwards. It can very easily, as happened with Hull, go quickly downwards. So a very, very important decision to make, because as we've said, the ambition is and always will be for this club when it's in the Championship to compete for promotion to the Premier League, and so it should be. I think you're right in terms of the disillusionment around the fan base. Another name who I didn't mention when I went through a couple of candidates there, Gary O'Neill. I've seen his name's been thrown in again. He was mentioned at the time that Carrick was appointed as well, and I remember at that time it was quite clear that he wouldn't be accepted by Borough fans after those comments in the past about a deliberate yellow card and getting the weekend off to watch the golf. And, the club took that on board ultimately, and Gary O'Neill wasn't considered at that time because the club appreciated that wouldn't be a good look, and he ultimately wouldn't be forgiven from that by fans. Now, since then he's gone on and created a bit of a reputation for himself. He did a good job initially at Wolves, and probably an appreciation now that he is quite a good head coach, and maybe could do a good job at Middlesbrough. But with that hanging over his head, even if initially the fan base kind of said, water under the bridge, forget about it, he's our manager, let's get behind him, it would only take, a few bad results and that would quickly come back up again, and that would quickly be thrown back in his face. And I think that'll be appreciated a lot by, the club's hierarchy when making this decision. So I'd be very, very surprised if Gary O'Neill was in the running. Yeah,
completely agree. John, kept you quiet for a little while. I'll bring you in now. I'll come to you. Your choices, we've seen the names that have been put about straight away. Is there anyone?
Do you know what?
You fancy coming in?
I haven't got a favourite. I've said earlier, all I want is whoever comes in gives us a team that fights and plays for the fans. I don't want to see any more weak, lily-livered, soft performances from our players. I just don't want that. It does me head in. So I don't know. I just want the manager to be honest, to get the best out of the players. I mean, that's what that Regis Lebris has done. He's got the best out of a set of players. And I mean, he came to Sunderland after getting the team relegated, didn't he? He didn't have exactly the best sort of CV, but Sunderland took a chance with him, and it's worked. And you've got to have a bit of luck. We've tried experienced managers without success. We tried Warnock, we tried Pulis, we tried Gordon Strachan. Vastly experienced managers. It didn't work. I know Pulis got us to a playoffs, but that was one of the worst playoff performances I can remember. The 0-0 and the 1-0 against Villa. We've tried young up-and-coming managers in Gary Monk. We've tried former players, legends, with Tony Mowbray. And yet the only one that's got us success over the last, 15, possibly longer years was an unknown guy from Spain, Aitor Karanka. So I don't know. It's a big call. Like I say, I just want whoever we bring in to instill in a group of players determination, strength. Obviously, it's still with a pattern of play that gets the fans excited. But I want the players on the pitch to show as much fight as and passion as the fans have got. That's it for me. So I haven't got a standout candidate at the moment.
That's it for me. It's like I'm letting you go. That's it for me. So no name stands out for you. Just all about
There was a
the
couple of
philosophy going forward.
Yeah, there was a couple of people threw some names in when I asked on Twitter, "Who do you fancy?" And there was a guy, Prisk, a manager. I forget his first name. But I looked at him and I looked at his sort of like his credentials. And he's managed at some big clubs and he's done quite well. He's currently out of a job, but he's been linked with Notts County purely and simply because he's known to the owners of Notts County. And there was a German guy called Schmidt who I think was manager of managed a few clubs successfully and then ended up at Benfica. You see those names, I didn't even consider them, but when people put them into the replies on Twitter, I thought, I don't know this guy, I'll have a look. And they have decent CVs. Yes, they've not managed in England, and we all know that it's a totally different beast. But neither did Bournemouth's manager, neither did Wolves' manager, and yet they've done particularly well. So, yeah, it's a risk, it's a gamble. Who do you go with? Do you go with somebody left field, or do you go for the tried and tested? It's difficult. Whoever comes in, I'll give them my support. I'll give them my support for as long as they remain as manager. But I've got to see commitment. I've got to see commitment from the team, from the players, and that's all I want. That's my wish list.
There you go. You know, up to you now, Mr. Gibson, to give Johnny's wish list. It's like Christmas come early. Craig, quickly come to you before I give you if my choice. So I think I'd love to come in. You know, you've mentioned Tony Mowbray there. You know, there was a lot of ticks and positivity about that. I can see why we wouldn't go that way. You know, I wouldn't want to put him through what he went through the last time he was here. That was horrendous. You know, being part of that game at Barnsley wasn't nice. Is there anybody that sticks out to you and think he's not a bad shout at all?
Yeah, I think given what he's done and given what he's achieved, I think of the current kind of names bandied about, I think Steve Cooper would be the kind of one if he could be convinced to come in and take the job. John's just mentioned a few kind of left field candidates there, and I wouldn't at all be surprised if that was a direction Borough went in, particularly if Cooper can't be convinced. I think if you think of Kieran Scott's history as well, he was obviously at Norwich when they plucked a relatively unknown Daniel Farke from Borussia Dortmund's academy, and obviously that proved very successful. So, I mean, I can't pretend to be a kind of European football expert, but people like Kieran Scott clearly will be, and people like Kieran Scott will know a lot of these kind of managers on the continent who are potentially worth a punt on. And what's always good about managers like that as well is that on the continent they're a lot more used to working in this kind of model as well. I know it's becoming increasingly common in England now to work as a head coach and then a recruitment team behind that, but on the continent that's been a thing for many and many years. So they're a lot more used to working within that model, and it's increasingly becoming the kind of direction that many Championship and English clubs go down, because there's been a lot of success stories. I know Danny Roll was mentioned at Sheffield Wednesday. I think it looks like it'll be quite costly to get him out of his contract with Sheffield Wednesday, but with the resources that he's had and the circus that is Hillsborough at the moment, I think he's massively overachieved at that club, and that's another example of a young coach coming in from the continent and proving how successful that kind of such limited resources, in better resources, could he do an even better job? I think he's on gardening leave at the moment at QPR, isn't he? So almost certain to be available if the right club wanted him. So, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see what kind of direction Middlesbrough go in.
Yeah, I've seen his name mentioned a few times, Martin Cifuentes. So, yeah, but you've mentioned the guy. I know you said he'll be costly to release from his contract, but I said it on Easter Monday when they beat us on 2-1 at Hillsborough. Go and get Danny Roll. Go and get him. I think now is a bigger opportunity as well. There's a lot of mishap about what's going on at Hillsborough. Players not getting paid. I imagine he's probably not being paid. So I imagine, like any of us would be, if you're not getting paid by your employer, you're not going to be the greatest happy, smiley person going to work, are you? So, for me, he's the guy. I'd go get him. He's my choice. But I'm like John. I'll back anyone that does take the seat, because I think we need to. Whatever happened in the last few months between us, all those fans and everybody else in the club and all this, separation. We need to get back together and go right. Next season, we need to hit this head on. We've seen what the Mackhams can do. Why can't we do it? So use them as a example. I hate using them as an example, but unfortunately, that's the way the world is.
Another couple of names. Sorry, Steve. Another couple of names that could be considered. George Boateng, ex-Borough, but he's made his feelings known that he wants to get into a management position. Now again, big call because he's a rookie. It'll be his first job. Another ex-Borough player, Michael Reitziger, currently looking after the Netherlands under-21 team. It's a big call, like we said earlier, from Gibbo, and it's one. It's one that you hope improves the club, improves the team, but it's a hell of a gamble. It's a big ask. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting few weeks.
But you're absolutely right. And when you said two players there, I honestly thought Ravanelli's going to come up out your mouth then. I thought, oh no. No. I'm waiting for his name to get mentioned at some point. But
it no doubt will.
It probably will. It's probably in the betting somewhere. I imagine there's a big list somewhere. But no, you're absolutely right. It's going to be an interesting few weeks. We couldn't let it go and not put our opinion out there, and let you guys know what we think. And I've loved seeing all the comments of what you guys think as well. And the amount of people that have been commenting there has been ridiculous. But I'll leave it there for now. We'll try and come back whenever it is that we get a new manager in through the door. We'll come back and talk about that. But Craig,
I'll put it on record now that I start a holiday next Tuesday for a week, and I'm going to be in a field with very low connection. So bank on it being any time from next Tuesday to the following Wednesday. That'll be when it happens.
It probably will.
You're taking a holiday. You're taking a holiday in a field.
I am. It's a festival, yeah. There's music and beer, and it's not just a field.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I thought you were just randomly going to pitch up somewhere, and as long as there's going to be lots going on, you're all right.
Yeah, to be fair, just pitching up a tent in a field in complete isolation doesn't sound too bad after today.
Complete isolation next Tuesday. You're going to download, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Yeah. Well, enjoy it. I say, Craig, thank you so much for popping on and giving us your opinion. Imagine it's been a very, very busy day. I mean, you told us what you did for your lunch and chucked it all over the supermarket floor and then ran out. So I hope you go and get fed and get some grub down you. But no, I appreciate you coming on and giving your opinion on what's happened and what could happen in the future. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. John, thank you very much. Enjoy the rehab. Get the knee better. I definitely want to see you back in the stands with us all. People have mentioned this in the comments. When you went off injured, we went downhill. Just saying.
Yep. See, what an influencer.
Exactly. Get your ass back. because we need it.
Yeah.
So yes,
No
but
problem.
yes, we'll be back in probably a couple of weeks whenever the new man's announced, whoever it may be. We don't know who it is, so don't bother asking me or messaging me. I don't know. And yeah, thank you so much for watching and listening and subscribing as usual. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Up the borough. Be seeing you. Cheerio. See you soon.